official. He's our chair, or he's our chief, what do we call it? Chair of rules? Our chair of rules. We have a rules committee here, he's our chair of rules. And he's actually now a professional referee. He's refereed an enormous number of days worth of golf over the years, the 25 years he's been involved in it. 596 days of golf he's refereed, so roughly. So it's a huge amount of experience, and as I said, he's now got a contract with PGA to referee on the tour events. So a wealth of knowledge, and we're very lucky that we were able to have someone with that knowledge to be able to share with us. So thank you, Barry, and I look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you. Thanks you all for coming out on a very cold night. I'm going to try and do without that if I can, because I want to wander around a little bit. So if people can't hear me, let me know and I'll resort to the microphone, but at this stage I'll stay away from it. I don't normally keep count of how many days I've done of anything. I was actually asked to do it, so I did it, and I was amazed myself by that. I want to talk about a few things tonight. I'm not going to try and go, here's rule 1, here's rule 2, here's rule 3, here's rule 4. I can honestly tell you that as far as the numbers of the rules goes, I don't particularly know them, and I don't particularly care what numbers they are, and I can tell you now the players don't give about what number of rule I'm playing. They just want to know what's right, and that's what you need when you're on the course. So I want to talk a little bit, if I can. I hope this works for me. Went back and forwards already. I want to talk about the principles of the game, because I think that underlies, you'll get a very quick idea that underlies how I operate as a referee and how we operate at a professional level in Australia and at the R&A and so on. It's really important. I have 2 abiding principles of golf. One is play the course as you find it, and you play the ball where it lies, unless there is a rule that allows you to do otherwise. Now, the difference between 2019 rules and the previous rules are that in the previous rules, it told you what you could do. In the new rules, it tells you what you can't do. So if it doesn't tell you you can't do it in the new rules, it means you can. And it's a fine point, and it comes into play a few times when you get into situations you go, what does the rule tell me? Well, if the rule doesn't tell you you can't do it, you can do it. We'll get to that, but we'll see how we go. We'll get to that later. So, the principle of the game. It needs, because the game is a worldwide game that we all share, and all share a love of, and some people, as it was said at Reg Pierce's funeral yesterday, his son said golf was aimed right in the head, and why he said it was, they're never happy, they always want to be better, they always want it to improve, and that's a very interesting observation. Golf is played and loved by people worldwide. It needs to be, so the rules need to be easily understood and applied by everyone when they need to be applied. They need to be simple, consistent and fair. And that's what the pros ask for. The pros ask for you to be consistent and fair. And when I'm refereeing and when you're applying the rules, it's about being fair. And the same approach for similar situations, and the rules now very strongly support pace of play. Now, what we see, of course, is that we've got a wide variety of playing conditions. I'd love to play in the snow. I reckon that would be the most interesting thing of all time. Every golf course is completely different. Even our golf course is different from summer to winter. And that the rules are affected that way. And the rules have to deal with every situation worldwide, which is why they're so complex. Because they have to allow for all those differences. So, speaking about the rules and pausing on this for a minute, here are the three main issues of rules of golf. There is a player's edition, which is the one you should have and the one you should carry. That's the useful one to you. There is the referee's edition, which is, and you can see how well worn it is. I'll explain why in a second. And this is the tournament director's one with all the explanations and decisions, which is an absolute nightmare. The previous decisions book was much easier to use. This one is it's a nightmare, but they'll sort it out one of these days. That is really good for curing insomnia. This one's not bad either. The reason this is like in this state is that even if I give a ruling to a player in a tournament, and I'm totally confident of that ruling, I will drive away after the player's gone, get this out and check that I was right. And if I was wrong, I'll go back and tell the player. Todd Sinnott, Riversdale Cup, won here. Gave him a wrong ruling last year at the TPS Rose Bowl. It didn't affect the score on the hole. He finished his round, it was on 18, he put it down beside the TIO, and I made him do it in a particular way that was wrong. Didn't matter, I'd given him his ruling, he made his par 4, walked off, was happy. Immediately the next morning when I saw him, I went to him and said, look Todd, I'm sorry, that was wrong yesterday. This is what your option should have been. Yeah, oh, Barry, that's fine, thanks very much for telling me. But that's why you always check it. There's also the RNA website, which I'll refer to again later, about where you can go and have a look at. And there's a Rules of Golf app, which is on your phone or your iPad, which I haven't quite mastered yet. I just don't feel comfortable getting my phone out on the course to look something up if I'm amongst players. The other thing quickly about Rules of Golf, knowing this, is the other things to check for, and I'm just using these as an example, is what are the local rules? So on a PGA Tour event, we have a set of supplementary local rules, and they're important. They'll come into play later. And just to complicate things, they have a hard card with all of their extra local rules on the hard card. Now, one of the local rules on the PGA hard card is you're not allowed to practice between holes. Catches amateurs out quite often. Had a lady playing in a tournament, I can't remember where it was, but gee, she didn't like it when I drove up and told her it wasn't appropriate for her to practice putt after she'd finished the hole. And she gave me a fair serve too, I can tell you. So, but in terms of the rules themselves, what I want to say is this: if you are going out for a social round, which I love, a hit and giggle, you're going to just go out and knock it around the ground, the rules of golf don't matter. Because you're not playing against anyone else except yourself. And you can really do whatever you like as long as you don't damage the course. But the minute you enter a card in a competition against other players, the rules of golf are there to protect the integrity of the field. And that's why we have them the way they are. So that everyone is bound by the same conditions, by the same set of applications, and the same set of understandings. So that the first person in the morning who tees off is applying the same set of rules as the last person in the afternoon. The rules are about integrity, they're about fairness to all. And that's the greatest thing about golf is, of course, that integrity relies on you as a player. And that's one of the things that really draws me to golf. Okay, I'm going to be trying to get through this. Now, let's talk about the key areas of the course. The key areas of course, and the way they're referred to has changed. There is now the area that used to be called Through the Green, but from 2019 has been called the General Area. There is the teeing area, there are bunkers, there are penalty areas, and there's putting greens. That covers it all. So, when you look at that, the general area covers everything that's not one of the others, including the rough. So the rough is just part of the general area, and that has implications for other rules and how we apply them. Okay, so now, before we go into specific rules, I want to go back to this for a moment. There are some critical things in here, and it's something that's worth you doing at another time. There are parts to this book that are really important. There are the rules that are written in it that I'm going to refer to in a moment. There is also a set of definitions. The set of definitions are critical, because if you don't see what the definitional difference between a loose impediment and a movable obstruction is, you can get yourself into awful trouble. And if you don't understand what the difference between a movable obstruction is and an immovable obstruction, you get yourself into worse trouble. And just to complicate things further, often the rules have subsections. And everyone reads it and goes, oh yeah, okay, I know the answer to that. Well, Rule 9.4, it's the only time I'm going to quote a rule directly except for one other today. Rule 9.4 is about causing your ball to move. And you read it and go, yeah, okay, I understand that. If you then go and look at the end of Rule 9.4, it's got 4 exceptions. The first one clarifies a situation. The second one contradicts the rule. The third one contradicts the exception before it. And the fourth one's just thrown in there to confuse you. So when a ball moves, you've got to think about all these other things before you can come to a firm decision. So just be wary when you're reading the rules, when you are, or you want to apply them, that you always look at the exceptions at the end of the rule, if they're there, and a lot of them are. I was talking to David Blake today, who's my guru that I go to, and I said, how many are there? And he said, forget it, Barry, there's just too many. He listed about 15 off straight away, where there are exceptions to the rules. And of course, there are exceptions to the rules. There are exceptions to the rules. And our local rules are exceptions to the rules. And they're accepted exceptions to the rules. All right. What I want to talk about today then is a series of things about playing golf at Riversdale. And I'll try and stick to what's pertinent to Riversdale. We know we've got all those things. So the general area. Firstly, abnormal ground conditions. What constitutes abnormal ground conditions? That is, conditions that weren't there yesterday, and if the greenkeeper fixes it, won't be there tomorrow, almost. It would be a good way of looking at it. It's an unusual way of looking at it, but we see it occasionally here. You might have tree damage of a storm. We don't often have rabbit scrapes, but we have foxholes. We sometimes have to do repairs and have to mark an area in white. We sometimes have temporary water in areas, and we need to be able to deal with those in a way that's fair to everybody that's on the course, so that those changes that have occurred during a competition or before a competition will be reflected in how we apply the rules. So I'll come to it in a moment because it applies probably the same way. I'm going to talk about a couple of the other things, and I'll come back to how to take relief from these shortly, and we'll entertain questions later, I'm sure. But one of the things of abnormal ground conditions that in the general area that applies, of course, or one of them, is immovable obstructions. Now, immovable obstructions are things like made paths, sprinkler heads, water fountains, artificial roads, unless the local rules state that it's an integral part of the course. Of course, what is not an artificial obstruction is a boundary fence, or a boundary stake for that matter. But everything else, because they have to be dealt with separately. But all the things that are in play that can't easily be moved and the fixtures to the course, if you like, are removable obstructions, and you're entitled to relief from them. So, let's just deal with that because I think that's really important. In the general area, if you've got an removable obstruction, you are entitled to relief. You're entitled to relief from that immovable obstruction interfering with your shot. Now let's be clear on that. So I knew I'm going to wander, and I will. I'm playing down there. My immovable obstruction now is that. Let's say it's one of our sprinkler boxes out on the course, and I'm right-handed, so I'm going to line up. That is interfering with my swing. I'm entitled to relief. I'm not entitled to relief from an immovable obstruction that's in my line of play. That's bad luck. I've just got to play the ball whichever way I can. But if it's not interfering with my swing, stance, or normal play in terms of hitting the ball, I don't get relief. So how do I decide to take relief? Right, firstly, I have to establish what's called a reference point. Now we now talk about reference points. So I have to decide, I'm back here again, and I'm playing down there. I've got to decide my nearest point of complete relief. So I'm right-handed, so that's likely to be here. I'll drop that there. Because for me to get relief over here, I'm not hitting it, I'm much further away with where my club head is. It's where my club head's going to be. And then I'm entitled for relief of one club length, not near the pin, the longest club in your bag that's not your putter. That would be my driver. So I would mark that. And then I'm entitled to, I've got complete relief. The last point's critical. It's the nearest point of complete relief, not the nicest point of complete relief. And I can tell you now, there are places around Riversdale where the nearest point of relief is in the garden bed or in the shrubbery. So you've got to make a decision. Do I want to play it from off the path, or do I want to drop it in the shrubbery? The classic example of that is the back of 11. If you're sitting on the back of the path of 11, your nearest point of relief is going to be in the garden. Now that garden is an integral part of the course. So you've got to choose, am I going to play it off the path, which is what I'd be doing, or am I going to drop it in there and try and find out how I'm going to do that from there? That's your option if you want the free relief. I'll come back to that in a second. That, by the way, when you take free relief, that's an arc. When you drop the ball, I'm sure it'll come up again in a minute, but while I'm there, I'll talk about it. When I drop the ball in my relief area from my point of reference, it must hit the ground in the area, and it must stay in the area. You used to be allowed to roll out. No, got to stay in the area now. And that's a critical point for later on, for something else we want to talk about later on. So the ball has to stay in the area. If it's a path we're talking about, it's something like this. It depends on whether your direction of play, it depends on whether you're left or right-handed. But if you're taking relief from the path, I've had this last, or 2 weeks ago, with players wanting relief off paths down at Moona in tour school. And the player had to take complete relief, and he was trying to do a balancing act on the edge here to make sure that he wasn't touching the path in any way, shape or form. And he was standing there with his feet saying to me, are you happy that I'm clear of the path? Because if he's touching the path, he's not taking complete relief, and if he plays the ball, he's disqualified. So, and it happened to Robert Allaby in a tournament in America. He took relief, dropped the ball, stood on the path and played the ball out of the tournament, straight out. So it does happen, whatever that normal course condition is. And I think that gives you a pretty clear picture. So, the next part of that, of course, is that the player must drop the ball and this is interesting, I see people doing all sorts of gymnastics to do this, and I don't understand why. The player must drop the ball, it must be dropped straight down from knee height without touching the player or equipment before hitting the ground. That's okay. It must be dropped in the relief area and it must stay in the relief area. So why does everybody do this? Because if it rolls and hits your foot after it hits the ground, it doesn't matter. I've been trying to tell people for years, the easiest way to drop a ball from knee height is to stand like that, where you want it to drop it. Put your hand, your hand between your knees like that and drop the thing. It's much easier than trying to get this calisthenic movement to get knee height, because it just works better. As long as it doesn't hit you on the way down, in case you've got to re-drop it. And one of the interesting things about the rules of golf is there's no penalty for incorrectly dropping a ball as long as you correct your mistake. So if you drop a ball wrongly, you're perfectly correct to say to your marker, hang on, I dropped that wrong. It did this or it did that, or I wasn't at knee height, I'll drop it again. Or I dropped it in the wrong place. And of course, if you drop it in your area, as so frequently happens, because most people who are taking drops aren't dropping them on flat fairway, they're dropping them in all sorts of areas where it's going to roll, and it rolls outside the zone, you've got to drop it again. You get 2 drops, and then you place it where it touched the ground on the second drop. That's relatively straightforward, but really important practice. It's worth practicing dropping the ball properly, particularly learning to drop it like that, because it doesn't matter if it rolls against your foot. It's not an issue. Used to be, not anymore. So, that sort of just illustrates what I'm talking about there. Now, there's just an illustration of where the nearest point of relief may be. The nearest point of relief for any abnormal condition might be behind the abnormal condition. If it's water or something that you're in, temporary water, or it's a marked area, or it's really ground under repair type things, your nearest point may be behind it. It could be here, it could be there, depending on whether you're right-handed, left-handed, how far from where the ball is, not your point of entry, but where's the ball in this situation. Later on you'll hear me talk about penalty areas. It's not where the ball is, it's where the ball went in the penalty area that's the issue. But for abnormal conditions, it's where's the ball. And if you lose a ball in an abnormal ground condition and to find one, and you can't find it, and your marker agrees without doubt it went in there is no penalty for a lost ball. You've then got to decide where you think it was and estimate where you go. That's just one of the nuances. So that's just the whole issue. Yep, go ahead.
When, in that circumstance, let's say the ball's further up, towards the flag, is the reference point no nearer to the hole, or where you drop it no nearer to the hole?
The reference point has to be no nearer to the hole.
Thank you.
Once you drop it, it can't roll forward of that reference point. Now that is in taking relief from an abnormal ground condition like that. You will hear what you think is me contradict that later when we talk about our blue stakes, because that's a different scenario altogether. Okay, so just keep that in mind, that I am going to apparently contradict that piece of advice later on.
Barry,
Yep.
if you want to take relief, for example, and you are intending to use like a wedge,
Yep.
right? And it obviously doesn't affect your swing.
Yep.
Can you take a driver and say, yes, it's affecting my swing, and I can then take relief?
If a ball is in an abnormal ground condition,
Or like, for example, that sprinkler box is not affecting, or is sort of affecting my swing, but with a gap wedge. But if I would use a driver,
I've never seen
definitely.
anybody actually try that on. I can imagine that the answer is yes. you can, but the 3 people who are playing with you may not play with you next week. It's the best way of putting it. Because yes, it's correct, but you know what I mean? It's sort of stretching how you can use the rules. And you can use the rules to your benefit, but that's sort of stretching. Anyway, movable obstructions. Movable obstructions are things that are artificial, and they shouldn't be there, like a bottle in a, like just what's shown here. And you're allowed to move them, and the important thing is, if in moving them, your ball moves, you simply replace your ball where it was. You don't drop it, you replace it. So movable obstructions are quite straightforward. That's different from loose impediments. Loose impediments are natural things like twigs and leaves and branches, and if you move those and the ball moves, you just move the ball and you've got a penalty. So you've got to understand the difference between a movable obstruction, which is artificial, and a loose impediment. If I can, I'll just escape for a moment because I'll mention that. I'm going to try and escape and try and go back to it. This is the one that's on the website. This is Hannah Green at the Victorian Open this year. And Hannah and I are having a discussion about whether a rock behind her ball is a loose impediment or not. And the discussion went something like this. Hannah said, Barry, do you reckon that rock's a loose impediment? And Barry said, well, Hannah, try and pick it up. And Hannah said, oh, okay. Picked it up. I said, good, it's a loose impediment. She goes, oh, thanks. I said, I can't help you with the big rock that's in front of your ball, which was really solidly embedded in the ground. So what you can't quite see here, she's going that way to the green. You can just see a little bit. There's a great big rock embedded in front of her ball, which was no way she could take it out. Hannah proceeded to take the club she's got in her hand and hit the ball at 4 feet, made birdie, and went on and won the tournament, of course. Lovely young lady, really quite special. All right, so that's that one. Now let's see if I can get this going back to slide view, if I can. Fingers crossed. Yeah, I can. Good. Wow. So the ball must be replaced on the same spot, and that's basically it. If the ball is lifted or the obstruction is removed, the ball has to be dropped where it was, not placed in this case, unless it's on the green, in which case the ball will be. And the reference point is right where the ball is, but you don't have a club length for a movable obstruction. It's just got to be there, and that's it. There are times. Sorry, you do have a club length. I'm getting confused with what I was about to say about something else. Right? You do have times where you can take a club length from a movable obstruction. And I don't have a problem with that, that's fine. But of course your reference point again can't be nearer the hole. So,
why would you take relief from a movable object if you just moved it?
I haven't figured that one out yet. But yeah, I know. But that's what the RNA say. You can have one club length relief. It may be that the movable object has damaged the area, like someone's got a chair sitting there or something, and it's damaged, you know, what the area is.
Because Hannah could have moved that little rock and then moved the ball.
No, well, no. See, no. The little rock was a loose impediment, not a movable obstruction. It was a natural object.
Immovable or movable?
It was a loose impediment. The question was whether it was a loose impediment or not whether it was a movable obstruction. She was in a sandy waste area. By the way, just going back to that, she was not in a bunker. 13th Beach has got these areas like that are sandy waste. They are not bunkers. And that's why she was allowed to. But it was a question about whether the impediment was loose or not. It's the Tiger Woods rock. Can you move it or not? And easily, and that tends to be a problem.
So in that situation, how do you define what's a bunker and what's not?
Oh, this is an argument we have quite frequently. We define bunkers in the PGA by that we've provided rakes to them, and the area is raked and manicured. We go to great lengths to make sure there are no rakes around those areas, and they're defined in the local rules. It's clearly defined, these areas on such and such and such and such are sandy wastes, or whatever we want to call them. All right. The one I want to come to apparently caused some consternation yesterday, I believe, is what is an embedded ball? Now, embedded balls around here at the moment, in this weather, are going to be a fairly frequent occurrence. And I've had a number of tournaments recently where I've both allowed and denied embedded balls. By definition, a ball is embedded, as you can see here, when part of the ball is below the normal ground level. It does not have to be touching bare earth. It can have compressed the grass into its own hole, and to be embedded, it must be embedded in its own pitch mark. My rule of thumb to that is, did you see the ball bounce? If the ball bounced, it's highly unlikely that it's then embedded. There's got to be some pretty soft ground for a ball to be embedded, and we probably shouldn't be out there, it's probably too wet. But if it bounced, I'm very loath to give an embedded ball ruling. But if the ball goes clunk and you get down there, and you are perfectly entitled to mark the ball and to lift it and to have a look underneath it, because that's what we do. I'll ask the player to mark it, I'll ask the player to lift it, I'll have a look. I got myself into an awful fight with a caddy at the TPS Sydney at Bonnie Doon. You all know what weather we had at Sydney this year, and the TPS, which is the Tournament Player Series, men playing women, which is the greatest innovation in golf I'll ever tell you. Get me started on that later. Who was it? I'll come back to the West Australian girl who's doing very well on the European Tour at the moment. Had a ball, she wanted to know whether it was embedded or not. And I actually denied the relief. The trouble was there was a piece of grass overhanging the ball. And I asked her to lift it and move it so I could see whether it was embedded, and I decided it wasn't embedded. And she was perfectly happy with that. But her caddy wasn't, because, and her caddies for her on the European tour. It's also her fiance apparently. So there was an interest there that made it a different thing. Anyway, she had to move the grass out of the way to get to the ball, and the grass didn't sit back the way the ball was originally. And the caddy wanted to buy in about it. She then didn't have her proper lie back and couldn't hit the ball the way she wanted to and everything. And the caddy and I had a little contretemps, in which case the caddy was asked to leave the area while I sorted that with the player. But it was just it's an easy enough decision. Is the ball below the surface of the surrounding soil? It doesn't matter if there's grass underneath it, it's allowed to compress. Embedded ball, straight out relief, no problems whatsoever. And it'll happen a bit here in the winter. Now, the drop without penalty, the reference point is exactly behind where it is, and then you've got that one club length arc. Now that seems pretty generous. And someone here's going to ask me now, well, what about if the ball's embedded in the rough and my one club length extends onto the fairway? Must be in the general area. Let's go back to my definition to start with. The general area includes everything that's not a green, a teeing area, a penalty area, or a bunker. So can you drop it on the fairway? Yes, you can. No problems. And that's one of the times the rules of golf work for you.
Can you clean the ball?
Sorry?
Can you clean the ball?
Yes. Yep. Good question. Where you can't clean the ball, thanks for reminding me, where you can't clean the ball is where you're moving a movable obstruction. You've got to be very, very careful that when you lift a ball and you are moving a movable obstruction, you don't clean your ball. Or you're trying to identify your ball, you're not allowed to clean your ball any more than to identify the mark on it that's yours. and I'll add that one in, and I've seen some players, I watched one last week do it, was asked to lift their ball by a player off the green, and this player stood with his ball like that while the other player played to make sure everybody knew that he didn't clean his ball. And I've seen the opposite of that, of a player asked to clean his ball down at Huntingdale for the big PGA. He picked his ball up and threw it to his caddy and he caught it in town. 2-shot penalty. Now, can you imagine a ball at Huntingdale being dirty? No way. The place was pristine. 2-shot penalty. Cleaning the ball, catching the towel when he shouldn't have. Just a really silly little brain fade. I think the caddy might have been looking for a new job. So, now, that's the now identifying balls, which is really quite important. Yeah, I know. People go to extraordinary lengths to identify balls, but I've got to tell you, you've got to be able to identify your ball, because if you can't identify your ball in 3 minutes, it's lost. That is the only way a ball is lost. When you can't find it and identify it in 3 minutes. It's not lost by you declaring it's lost. It's not lost by you doing anything else like that. It's lost when you can't find and identify it. The classic case I saw was Aaron Baddeley and Colin Montgomery at the Australian Open at Royal Sydney a few years back, which Aaron Baddeley won. In the same group, I was the walking rules official. I'm down the fairway watching what's happening and actually saw it. Colin drove first. Aaron hit his ball and rested next to it. And they were both playing titles fours. Now, if they hadn't marked their ball appropriately and weren't able to then walk up and go, oh, Aaron, that's yours and that's mine, they both are back to the tee playing 3 with lost balls, even though they're sitting there in front of them, because they don't know that it's their ball. So that's just a little nuance in this that I'm not covering elsewhere. But the difference in the new identifying rule is you don't have to announce it to anyone. You used to have to tell your marker you were going to do it and get permission, type of thing. Now, as long as you mark it, you can lift it, you can rotate it, as long as you put it back in its position. Can't be cleaned more than it needs to be, and then it's got to be put back.
What do you mean by needs to be?
Well, if you've got a ball covered in mud and we're not playing preferred lies, then you've got to play the ball the way it is. And if that mud is covering the mark on your ball that would let you identify it, you're allowed to scrape enough off that ball to see your identification mark. And then you've got to put it back down. Because you've got to identify it as yours.
Big mark on the ball.
Put big marks.
No, little mark, so you have to clean a lot to get to it.
That's what I think.
A big mark to clean everything off to get to the mark.
Some people just make sure that they're long enough.
I was looking for a ball with a big mark on it, but that's all right.
But mine's a white ball, so you have to clean
All
it
right.
off. Yours is a
Replace
white
ball
ball,
in the original
so
spot.
you need to make sure it's white.
Now, this is my favourite rule. This is the only time I would name the rule, Rule 19. This is my favourite rule. Unplayable ball. There are 3 options for relief under an unplayable ball. But the bit I love about unplayable ball is that the player is the only one who is the judge of whether their ball is unplayable. And as long as it's not in a penalty area, it can be declared unplayable anywhere on the course. So anywhere except the penalty area, you can declare your ball unplayable. So let's say you're standing right up the top of the back of 18 and the pin's right down the front and they've decided that the greens are going to be quick today, and you putt the ball and it rolls straight past, straight over the hill, down into the bunker, you can declare your ball unplayable. And for a penalty of 1 shot, you can go back to where your putt was and you can put the ball down again where it was on the green, and you can play on for a penalty of 1 shot. Now, if you can't play bunker shots, that's heaven sent. I've seen it happen. Greg Chalmers did it at Victoria in the Australian Open. 6 feet above the pin on the one of the par threes, he actually missed the putt and rolled 30 metres down the fairway. And he declared his ball unplayable and walked back up, put it down again, had the line this time, put it straight in the hole. Peter Senior, I see, to do exactly the same thing. So it's an interesting. So what are you allowed? You're allowed stroke and distance. In other words, you can go back to wherever you last played it for a one-stroke penalty. You can go back as long as you like on your line and drop the ball and play it for one-stroke penalty, or you're allowed 2 club lengths lateral relief in a circle either side of where it is. Most people associate unplayable ball with you're behind a tree or up a tree, but it doesn't have to be so. It could be quite a number of other things. There is another one of these, right? And there is another option, so I'll just go to that. So there's your unplayable ball, it's in there. You've played it from here. If you play like me, yeah, that'd be right. I put it in there. I can go to my 2 club lengths, I can go back online, or I can go back to where I hit it from the first time for 1 penalty. The other saving grace is as an additional option for relief in a bunker. If you're particularly bad at bunker shots, you can go back on relief outside of the bunker for that additional penalty. If you're in the bunker and you're taking an unplayable ball normally, you've only got the back on line as far as the limit of the bunker is. Or go back, let me start that again. If you are in a bunker and you deem your ball unplayable, it's up under the lip of something and you just can't get at it. There are certainly some this week at St Andrews that qualified for that. And I saw one player play backwards out of a bunker because it's the only way you go. You declare it unplayable in a bunker, your options are limited to being in the bunker or going back to where you played it from last time. So you can take lateral relief, you can go back, but only on the limits of the bunker. I'll admit to this, happily admit to this, when I did my level 3 with the RNA in Brisbane, that was the question I got asked on the practical exam, on the 3 hours of practical exam we did out in the field. I got that one and I went blank. I couldn't remember what the third option was. So my answer at the time was, I happened to be in there with the chairman of rules for Golf Australia at the time, or the head of rules, Simon Delsky. So I took the fictitious radio and radioed Simon and said, right, Simon, I'm standing here in a mess with this player. Simon was the player and said, I've gone blank. What do I do now? And I remembered 2 of the options. He goes, Barry, you can go back online as well. Okay, thanks. We laughed about it later, but I wasn't laughing about it at the time, I've got to tell you. So, you end up with 2 penalty strokes. But for ladies particularly, I think, and I don't mean to be sexist about this, but I think ladies seem to have a lot more trouble with bunkers than others. And tell me if I'm wrong, Sue, and that later. You can rip me to pieces for saying that. Some of the ladies I know can't play at a bunker to save themselves. You've got the option of coming back behind the bunker. I won't dwell on that too long because I'm going to run out of time. I'm not even going to bother with teeing areas today. I think we'll just leave that. Teeing areas is an area that's there. Everyone knows what teeing areas are because there's another thing I want to talk about. I want to talk quickly about penalty areas. Quick reminder that in bunkers now, just quickly, in bunkers you can remove loose impediments, right? You can remove movable obstructions. You can ground your club. In other words, you're waiting for your partner to play. You can stand there and have your club in the ground like that. Big deal. What you can't do is have a practice swing that touches the sand, or ground your club behind or in front of your ball when you make a swing. So there's no problem with that. You can, please, oh no, I probably shouldn't say, but you can even take your buggy and your bag in the bunker and you won't be penalised for it. You might be by the captain, but you won't be by the rules of golf. Sorry, yeah. Now I'm in real trouble. But it changes things, and it comes down to testing the conditions. So you can't test the conditions in the bunker. And it also got to do with, if I see a player take a stance like this, and then puts his club down and plays, well, I'm happy with that. If I see a player do that and walk away, and then come back and do it again, we're going to be having words about whether he's just broken the rule or not. No question about it. Now, the one question particularly I think that's important here, and I'm heading through a bit quicker than I should, is the issue about temporary water in bunkers. The issue about temporary water anywhere. The only time you get free relief from temporary water everywhere, but in a bunker, it's the nearest point of best relief, right? If you can't get complete relief, then you're stuck with either taking a penalty and going back out of the bunker, or you're going to play it out of water, one way or another. You've got no choice. And that comes down to a committee decision at the start of the day about whether a bunker is in play or not.
So
that's,
so Barry, if you
before
hit
we
into
jump
the-
on them for that, that is a very hard decision to make. That is a nearly impossible decision to get right. Casey?
if you know you hit the ball into the bunker,
Yep.
but you can't find the ball in the water because the
Yep.
water is too deep, you can't find the ball, what do you do then?
Well, if your marker agrees that that's what you've done, then there's no problem. That ball is lost in an abnormal ground condition, temporary water, and that's fine. The one, yeah, okay. So what you're doing is you're going to drop the ball in the bunker at the best point of relief you can find in agreement with where you think you're going. One of the good things about the new rules of golf is that they don't specify that it's got to be dropped on the blade of grass that it happened on. The nearest best estimate is good enough. It's part of speeding up play, but it's also part of being a little bit sensible about what's there and what's not. John?
Just with that, Barry, there was nothing mentioned about actually when you take relief and whatever, the first thing you do, or is it changed that you mark the ball? Mark the
You
spot
only
where the
have
ball
to
was.
mark a ball if you're going to put it back where it was.
What when you're taking relief?
No,
Just in those earlier ones where
yeah,
you
don't have to. No, you don't have to mark the ball.
So the ball's embedded.
A ball is embedded, you don't have to mark the ball. No, you only have to mark a ball when you are going to put it back where it was. So if you're on the green and you want to lift your ball, you mark it and you lift it. If you're in the fairway and John asks you to mark your ball because it's in his line of play, you mark it and you lift it. Unless you're going to put the ball back where it was, you are not required to mark a ball anymore. If you're going to identify a ball, you're going to put it back. So you've got to mark it before you lift it.
So that's a 2019 change.
That's a 2019 change. And it's a really good one. Sorry?
So the sprinkler, the water things in your way, it's an immovable object, you're going to take relief. Your reference point is the ball.
Once you've found your reference point, pick your ball up. You don't need to mark it.
We only put a,
No. Because and if you do decide to put it back, it's a one-shot penalty for moving your ball.
okay.
Because you're playing from where it was to start with. Because you shouldn't have moved it.
In the past, I would have put a tee down and got your club.
Yeah, oh yeah, no. And every week on the tour, I have players ask me, do I need to mark my ball? And I'm going, no, you want to go over there? Mark it. You know, he said, okay, the player will say, okay, I want to drop it here. I won't even make them mark out the club length because it's clearly inside a club length. They know what a club length is. Drop the ball and let's get going.
Barry,
Yep, Jerry.
is it a good idea to put a tee down or put something down to mark a reference point?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Jerry's point's important. That's predicated on that you've marked the reference point. If you don't mark the reference point, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying you don't need to mark the ball.
Don't mean to mark where you have the ball up from.
So Barry, just on that, you
Hang
know,
on, let me just clarify this because this is really important. My ball's here, my ball's there, my reference point's there. I mark my reference point. Once I've marked my reference point, I can pick my ball up. I don't need a mark where the ball was. Sorry, Philip, I'm slow.
So why isn't the reference point where the ball is?
No, because the reference point is the reference for relief. That's why it's a reference point.
nearest point of the reference.
And that's just a definition of things from the R&A. The reference point is the nearest point of complete relief. And again, I go back to in the definitions in the rules. That's why they're so important. All right.
Barry,
Yeah.
boat is almost full.
Yep.
The best relief is right at the back of it. You got 4 inches of sand.
Yep.
What's your penalty for back of
One
back
shot.
of line?
One shot. One shot.
Why? Because you can't.
That's what the rules of golf say it is. Oh, look, I'll give you the classic example of this. I was refereeing in Kalgoorlie at the West Australian PGA, and we're 3 holes to go, and the 2 leaders are equal. And Jared Felton needed relief on the green from an area that was white marked on the green. And this is what it comes down to sometimes. And so I went on the green in front of PGA TV. The commentator said I was arguing with the player. We weren't arguing, we were just discussing where relief was. So we went and took relief. He says, "This is my point of relief." I said, "Yep." He said, "But the ground in front of me is just as bad as the area in the white line. Why can't I have relief from that?" And all I could think of was the tournament director didn't mark it. Do you know what the player said to me? "Fair enough." Puts the ball down, puts it in the hole. It was just an absolute classic, but it's just, that's what the rule is. If you can't, if you want to take it out of the bunker, it's a 1-shot penalty. It's as simple as that, because bunkers are meant to be nasty places.
Doesn't become unplayable on the 2.
No, for relief from temporary water, it's not, you're not taking it as an unplayable ball. It's temporary water rule. It's an abnormal ground condition rule. Okay. So you're going to decide what you're playing under. Penalty areas we all know about. We've got lots of them. Penalty areas are really important. The difference, I just want to quickly touch on this, and then I think that we might just almost quit. You can touch or move loose impediments. Basically, the penalty area is the same as you're playing in the general area now. The difference is it's a penalty area, and if it's too difficult to play from, you can take relief with a penalty. The important thing about this is that the penalty area has these things in it. Now, all of ours are movable obstructions. Because it's in or out doesn't matter. You can take it out. That's not a problem. Okay, so if it's in your way, take it out, please put it back in. If you're up against a stake next to the practice fairway on the boundary stakes, out of bounds stakes, on the second, you can't, right? So the blue stakes, the red stakes, you can lift the stakes and put it back in when you play your shots. On the out of bounds stakes, you can't. If you replace it before you play your shot, you won't be penalised for it. But if you take it out or move it and leave it there, you will be. And so basically you've got the same actions. Now, just quickly, I think we all know, because we've got so many of them, that we just need to be virtually certain that the ball's gone in there. If you hit the ball over the back of 13, left-hand side, and you go down there and you can't see your ball, that's virtually certain. If you hit your ball right of centre on the 3rd, I wrote about this on the website, and you go over the back and you can't simply find your ball, I think it's reasonable to conclude the ball's rolled that way into there. If you hit left of centre, I went over and did a whole lot of experiments to get to this conclusion. If you go left of centre, it's probably rolled down onto the 4th fairway or into that gutter on the 4th fairway. But if you've got right of centre, I couldn't get a ball to stop that didn't go into the penalty area. So I'm comfortable with this club playing it that way. Your relief options, of course, for one stroke penalty, you've got stroke and distance. You've got back on the line, and I've upset Golf Australia years ago by making all of our penalty areas here red stakes. It was just sensible to me. You've got lateral relief, and you can come out, your 2 shots for 1 shot penalty. The burn on the 13th used to have allowed, where the rules changed is you used to have equidistant side relief. That no longer applies unless you have a local rule telling you can. And I deliberately did away with that local rule. So you must, if you're going to take relief back from the burn on the 13th, you're going to be fairway side, not green side. You've got to play over it again. End of story. That's probably the classic quick example of that. Sorry, I'm just trying to fit in the hour.
Barry, can I just ask a quick question about penalty areas?
Oh yeah, let's go to that one. Hang on.
Oh, no, this is another one, sorry.
Yeah.
If, for instance, you're on the 3rd and you know your ball is on the right of centre and it might have rolled down into the penalty area,
Yep.
are you allowed to hit a provisional?
No. You can't hit a provisional for a ball into the penalty area. If you say to your playing partners, I think my ball might be lost out of the penalty area, and you can hit a provisional, but then when you go up there, everyone's pretty certain it's gone in the penalty area, your provisional's not in play, and you've got to take relief under Rule 17 for penalty areas. Jerry sent me this photo the other week, and I don't want to have a go at our ground stuff, but this is a fairly inappropriate place to put a blue stake. But why I put it up is for a reason. And there seems to be a lot of confusion at this club and other clubs about this. I don't have a blue marker, so I'm going to use a green stake in the ground there. How do we take relief when we're allowed, under our rules, to go to a dropping zone? Our rules stipulate that you need to go to the nearest blue stake, even if it's closer to the green. That's not a problem. And how do you define then what? So that becomes your reference point. The difference here is that you're allowed one club length 180 degrees around the reference point. Now why this picture is interesting is, of course, that clearly means you've then got an immovable obstruction inside your dropping zone. If you were forced to do this, and everyone's going to go, hang on, we know this hole, the tee's back here, the green's up there, you can't drop in front of the reference point. This is the one time you can. You can drop in front of a reference point if it is a dropping zone. You can even, and it can be closer to the green than where your ball is, if it's the nearest one to where your ball was, whether that's on the 10th, the 13th, the 17th, or wherever you see one of these things, or the 3rd. The idea is pace of play. The idea is it's the same for everyone, but you're allowed to go forward on it. And you can pull the stake out to play your shot. I had someone write to me that during COVID, when we weren't allowed to touch the stake, you were restricted to a 90-degree wedge. Right? You drop it, all over the place here, but you just couldn't touch the stake at that stage, and we know the problems with that. If you then drop it, and my club, say, gets to here, and I'm standing on that, then I have to re-drop it according to the immovable obstruction rule. And I wouldn't, even at a pro event, I would not allow the pro just to drop it over here where he wants to go. We know it's going to go there. I had a case, this is going back many years when he was still playing and I was just starting. We were playing at 18 at Honeydale in the Masters, and Greg Norman put it into the tents behind this set of hoardings. And he said to me, Barry, I'm going to drop it on the fairway. And I said, yeah, that's where you're going to end up, Greg, but you're going to be on TV and they're going to show every bit of it. He said, right, let's do it the right way. 4 drops later, it was on the fairway where it was going to be. But he had to take separate relief from each of the obstructions. And I just want to point out this issue about where you can drop in there, or I would have forgotten it in the early of this. All right, thank you for the photo, Jerry. Now, we'll try and navigate this in the end. All right, I can take the questions on this. Have I got that? Yep. Okay, just a bit quickly on the putting green. The putting green, right, the ball may be lifted and cleaned, the ball must be marked before it's lifted, the ball must be replaced in its original spot. Now, this is a question I've been asked and I'll describe what I saw. Aaron Wilkin, 13th hole at Gunnamatta at the National, in the National Classic back in March. We had 60km/h winds blowing straight down the course, as you do it at the National. 40 feet above the hole, marked his ball, put it down, stepped up, putted it to 2 feet. Walking down towards his ball, the wind blew the ball off the green and 50 metres down the fairway. He was not a happy player. Because the question was then, Barry, what do I do? And my answer was, get out your wedge. because in the first instance, when he marked his ball and replaced it and picked up his marker, if the ball had blown away, he has to replace his ball. But once he's played it, he hasn't marked the ball. If the ball blows away, it's where it is.
You could have taken an unplayable and taken a one shot.
He could have, and he would. He was. I think he was so angry he didn't even think of it. At which point, Marcus Fraser, who was in the group, walked over to me and said, "Barry, I love playing in the wind, but I think this course is unplayable." And I've gone, "Langers, I think this course is unplayable," and Marcus Fraser thinks so too. And Langers has gone, "Has everyone got their air horns? 3, 2, 1, stop play," which made Aaron even angrier. The problem with coming off the wind, and we had a number of balls rolling on the greens, the problem with coming off the wind is when you go back. Because when you can go back for rain, but if you come off the wind, it's a nightmare. And that's it. Yeah, okay. You can also now repair lots and lots of damage on greens. You can remove loose sand and soil, you can repair ball marks, spike marks, you can repair old hole plates, all sorts of things. Animal tracks. I had to call the supers out at Cypress Lakes up in the Hunter, as I watched a crew of about 5 kangaroos tear a bunker and a green to pieces just before play started. It wasn't a pretty sight, and you can remove objects and do that sort of thing.
So on our greens, particularly 10, which is really soft underfoot, are we almost able to, like, how much?
Pretty well, if it's clearly spike marks and people stepping on it, and you can repair it, yes, you're allowed to.
You could be there all day.
You'll be there all day. And this is one of the problems. This is one of the problems we face about that, and courses need to be cognizant of taking the holes out of play when that's happening, and I think that's what's happening.
Very interesting. I'm surprised Nifty hasn't raised this. Because one of the exceptions, I think, to this is aeration mark.
Yeah, aeration marks. I'm about to come to that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting here, because the aeration marks actually left a rise.
Yep. Not damage on the green. Aeration marks and verticoring. Yep. Damage resulting from irrigation and rain. Bad luck. You get relief from temporary water, and I've just had one at Moona last week, which is the first time I've seen it, where a player asked me for relief from temporary water that was not on the green while he was putting on the green. Because he wanted to putt over the shoulder of the green, and the shoulder of the green had all this water on it, and he was on the green and the pin was down the other side. And the answer, of course, is yes, you take the ball and you place it where that water is not affecting your line and you're allowed to putt it, the same as it would be as if the water was on the green. You don't get relief for bare or diseased areas, and you don't get relief for natural wear of the hole, which is a bit, bothers me a little bit, but it's what it is. Okay, wrong green, you've got to get off it. You cannot play for wrong green. End of story. Be quick with that. Flagstick, you can leave it in the hole, but you can't take it out once you putt it. You've got to have, you can have it removed, you can have it attended. You've got to decide before you make the stroke which it is. No penalty hitting the flagstick anymore. I like it, other people don't. Some of the pros do, some of them don't. Okay, the last quick thing I want to talk about very quickly is rules pathways, because I know a few people are interested in possibly following rules pathways. So I'll be quite quick, because there ain't much to tell you. I'm sorry. If you want to follow a rules pathway, or just improve your knowledge of the rules, go to the RNA website and go to the Rules Academy. You've seen this, you can read what they've got there. This is on there. And you can do the level 1 exam online. If you do the level 1 exam online, they will give you a result, and they will send that result to Brian Hill at Golf Australia. Brian asks also that if you do it and you're interested in furthering that knowledge, you let him know you've done it, so he can follow up on it. That's level 1, what used to be called club level. As of Friday, speaking to Brian, there will be no level 2 courses this year, or probably for the next 12 months. And the big problem is that I got Brian at the moment that they want to do it. There's a possibility that I might end up doing level 2 courses for them, but that hasn't been, there's a lot of water to go under the bridge before that happens at the moment. But that's level 2. If you do level 2, you're then sent back to your club to get experience and to do club events, which is great. And there are a couple of other options that you might get invited to after you've got experience and you're getting known. You might be invited to do some Golf Australia events, but they're very, very limited at this stage what they're available. And at the moment, nobody is getting invited to do level 3. Level 3 is a whole different ballgame. Level 3 is a 4-day residential TARS, Tournament Referee School, with a 3.5-hour exam. That's the hardest thing I've ever seen in my life. I have no wish to repeat it in a hurry, but it's a very interesting process. But if you want to referee at something like the Open or the US Open, you've got to get a certain score at that level before they'll let you in near it. All right, I'm happy now. I know Philip's going to serve some food shortly, and I'm happy to take questions while you eat and keep going with that if people would like to. Or otherwise you can just nosh on and ask me questions. Yep.
If you got to decide beforehand, why would you have it attended if you're not allowed?
Oh no, if it's attended you can remove it.
Oh, okay.
But what you can't do is go, hey Raso, get it out for me. Because it's too late. You've committed to what it is. Is that yours?
No, just a quick one. So at the moment, 13 holes, this is a discussion we had the other week.
Yeah.
We weren't too sure about it. If your tee shot goes out of bounds on the right,
Yes.
do you have to find the ball?
No. If you decide the ball's out of bounds,
So basically,
it's out of bounds. Yeah. You notice pretty well everything today, by the way, as I've talked about, is stroke play, not match play. Because match play is a whole different ballgame. Because match play is between the two of you and you decide what you're going to do. But, yeah, no, you don't have to find your ball. As soon as you put another one down and say, that's gone out of bounds, I'm going to play this ball. I haven't dealt with provisional balls today, but as soon as you put that one down and you play another ball, that ball's in play. Unless you announce, hang on, this is a provisional, or something like, I'll put this one in play and we'll go and search for that one, or something that indicates you're playing a provisional. You don't have to say the word provisional, something that indicates. You've got the chance then to search for it, but you don't have to see it. You can go, I've had enough of this, this one's in play. Get another one.
But it's still a penalty.
You're still playing 3 off the tee.
I'm talking about and this since the 13th hole.
Yeah.
The way you're playing at the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it's clearly GUR.
Yeah.
But, you're hitting it for the right.
I think you weren't talking out of bounds, you're talking in the GUR.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
If you're talking the GUR and you and your marker both agree that you are 90% certain, 95% certain that ball went in that GUR, then you can proceed down there and take relief
Without looking for
it. No question. You don't have to find your ball.
Barry, in the event of hitting out of bounds on the second, say,
Yes.
and you don't play a provisional,
Yep.
what's your option there?
Your option, if you're playing in normal handicap
Stroke.
competition,
Yeah,
your only option is to go back to the team.
only option.
Yes. If you're playing in social comps on a Sunday or a Tuesday afternoon in a ball comp with the pro shop, the supplementary local rule of stroke and distance for a two-shot penalty comes in. Hang on, this is, while they're putting that out, this is worth mentioning. On the local rules, there is a local rule for general social play that is not Thursdays, or sorry.
No, it is.
No, it's for lots of days. It specifies what days it can't be used on. Like board events and things.
Okay.
But in the other days, it can be used, and I don't know the list off the cuff. So what that means is, you can say, okay, where did it go out of bounds, estimated, I can take an arc, equally distant arc out to the edge of the fairway, drop the ball and play on for a two-shot penalty.
Okay.
There.
So you're playing 4 off.
Yes. You're playing the same,
Yep.
as if you played another shot down the
Okay.
fairway.
Thank you.
It's about this one.
Only on Saturday.
Not on the Saturday.
Topic of this time.
Not on Saturday. But I've seen guys, when I've been practicing,
temporary
I've seen
water.
guys.
You can't do it.
You see a lot of antics going on to establish that your ball is in temporary water by jumping up and down.
No.
So what's for the benefit of everyone, what's
benefit of
temporary
everyone-
water in these wet
Okay,
days?
I walk up to my ball, and as I just take my stance like that, water appears at my feet. That is temporary water. If I've got to do this, bad luck. Play it as it is. But it's literally when I walk up, the water is apparent as I stand there. You can't squeegee it up. It's not on.
I think it's got a bit.
Thanks, this is a light bulb.
No, lightning.
This is a light bulb.
This is
That's
light
not a heavy
bulb.
one.
Yeah, Barry's having the heavy one.
Yes, yes. Wendy? No, it's bad luck, it's your ball. No, you can't substitute a player.
Put some lead in the saddlebags.
Okay, thanks, Barry.
I'm done.
Hey, thanks, Barry.
Okay, thank you, Barry. That was really informative and easy to follow. So it was a great presentation. Hopefully, people will have been able to learn something tonight that they didn't know beforehand. I think some of those 2019 rules in particular were things that might have escaped some of the people who thought they know a lot of the rules that they have changed. So I've said before, we're very, very fortunate that we've got someone with Barry's experience and skills and knowledge to impart that to us as members of this golf club. So I'd just like to thank you very much, Barry, and a small token of our appreciation.